The day after my wife's funeral, my stepchildren stormed into the house and began throwing her things into trash bags. Dresses, photos, even her jewelry box. They laughed and said, "It's just junk." I didn't stop them. I just watched in silence. Because inside that box was a secret worth $2 million, and when they discovered what they had tossed away, everything changed. Before we start the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell icon so you never miss the next one. My name is Calvin, and I was 58 when I lost my wife, Margaret. For more than 2 decades, she had been the steady light of my life. When she passed away, the house felt empty and cold, even though all her things were still in their places. Every corner of the house reminded me of her floral dresses still hanging neatly in the closet, her collection of old recipe cards stacked in the kitchen drawer, and her favorite books resting on the living room shelf. But most of all, I thought about the little wooden jewelry box she kept on her nightstand. It was scratched and faded with age, but she treated it as though it was the most precious thing she owned. I had never opened it, not once. She always told me it carried memories too valuable to lose, and I respected that. After the funeral, her 2 children from her first marriage, Paul and Jessica, came over. They weren't crying. They weren't even quiet. Instead, they walked through the door like they owned the place. Paul clapped his hands together and said, "All right, time to clean this place out. No point keeping junk around." His words cut straight into me, but I kept my mouth shut. Jessica walked straight into the bedroom and started pulling Margaret's dresses from the closet. She tossed them onto the bed without even looking at them, muttering, "Outdated anyway." I stood in the doorway, frozen, as every piece of fabric felt like another piece of Margaret's life being thrown away. Paul opened the drawers and pulled out framed photographs, still with dust on the glass. "Nobody needs these old pictures," he scoffed, dropping them into a black trash bag. Jessica stacked Margaret's books into another box, grumbling about how heavy they were. My heart ached, but I stayed silent. They didn't want to remember her. They wanted to erase her. When Paul reached for the nightstand, he picked up the old jewelry box. He shook it once, listened, then laughed. "It's empty," he said, tossing it carelessly toward the trash pile. Jessica smirked. Figures, she never owned anything valuable anyway. They had no idea what they had just touched. I clenched my fists but kept my face calm. Let them believe they were sweeping away a life like it was garbage. I knew something they didn't, and when the truth came out, their smug faces would tell me everything I already suspected. Hidden inside that little box was something that would change everything. Paul and Jessica worked quickly, their voices filling the house like noise I couldn't escape. Every bag they tied shut seemed to drag another piece of Margaret's memory out of reach. I stayed seated in the chair near the kitchen, my hands gripping the wooden armrests, watching in silence. They didn't notice how my knuckles turned white, or maybe they didn't care. Jessica dragged a bag of clothing to the door and said, "We'll take this to the dump later, no point keeping any of it." Paul nodded and smirked. "Out with the old, right?" I could feel the sting in my chest, but I kept calm. I knew if I argued, it would only fuel their cruelty. Instead, I let them continue, because deep down, I knew something they didn't. Margaret had always been careful with her things. She never told me everything, but she hinted more than once that her jewelry box held more than just memories. I remembered her voice one night, soft and serious. "If anything ever happens to me, don't let anyone treat my things as worthless. That box will explain why." Jessica came back into the living room and flopped down on the couch, wiping her forehead dramatically. "We're almost done. Once we clear out the rest of this junk, maybe we can finally make this place feel normal." She didn't even notice that word, normal, felt like a blade. My home with Margaret had been warm, alive. Their idea of normal was emptiness. Paul glanced at me with a smirk. "You should be thanking us, Calvin. We're doing you a favor, clearing all this out so you don't have to live with the past." I looked him in the eye but didn't answer. He mistook my silence for weakness, but really, it was patience. He didn't know that in trying to erase her, he was setting himself up for the cruelest surprise of his life. The pile of trash bags grew taller by the minute, stacked near the front door like trophies of their hard work. Jessica tugged another box across the floor and laughed. She really kept everything, didn't she? Old scarves, birthday cards, even broken watches. Who keeps this nonsense? Her laughter stung. Not because of what she said, but because I could still remember Margaret holding those same scarves in her hands, telling me stories about where each one came from. To Jessica, they were rags. To Margaret, they were a map of her life. Paul picked up a faded photo album and flipped through it carelessly, his thumb smearing across the plastic pages. Look at this. Who even prints photos anymore? Waste of space. He tossed it into the bag like it was nothing. I bit the inside of my cheek and stayed still. My silence wasn't weakness. It was a shield. If I said anything now, I knew they would only laugh harder, maybe even take more pleasure in destroying what was left. The jewelry box still sat on top of one of the bags. Its lid was crooked, the little brass latch barely holding it shut. They hadn't even bothered to open it properly. Jessica kicked the bag it rested on and muttered, "We'll throw all of this out tomorrow morning. Good riddance." Inside, I felt a storm building, but I didn't let it show. I glanced at the box once more, then looked away before they noticed. Margaret's voice echoed in my memory again. "Calvin, promise me you'll never let that box be forgotten." I had promised her, and I wasn't about to break that promise now. I leaned back in my chair, watching them congratulate themselves for their so-called cleanup, while knowing their pride would soon turn into something they could never hide: fear and regret. The secret inside that box was safe for now, and when the time came, it would break the arrogance right out of them. By the time the sun had slipped low through the windows, Paul and Jessica's patience with each other began to crack. They had filled nearly a dozen bags and stacked several boxes against the wall, yet their eyes kept darting toward the few items they hadn't touched. The heavier furniture, the china cabinet, the jewelry box still sitting crooked on top of the trash pile. Jessica broke the silence first. "Well, if we're clearing everything out, I think the china set should go to me. Mom always let me use it when guests came over." Paul scoffed. "You mean the one you chipped last Thanksgiving? No, I'll take it. I can probably sell the whole thing as a set." Jessica shot back. "You're unbelievable. Everything doesn't have to be about selling." He leaned forward, his voice sharp. "Then what's the point of keeping it? To collect dust in some cabinet? At least I can turn it into cash." I sat quietly in the chair, watching their greed expose itself with every word. It wasn't grief that filled their voices. It was hunger. Margaret's belongings weren't memories to them, only objects they could fight over or flip for money. Jessica's eyes fell on the jewelry box again. "That old thing is worthless anyway. But if it's not, I'll keep it. Mom always trusted me more than you." Paul smirked, shaking his head. "Please, if there was anything valuable in there, she would have told me, not you. She didn't trust either of us that much." They bickered back and forth, their voices rising, and all the while I sat still, my hands folded, keeping the storm inside me contained. I already knew the truth, that the moment they dismissed as worthless held more weight than everything else in the room combined. Their fight grew louder, but I stayed silent, because I understood something they didn't. When the box finally revealed its secret, their shouting would stop, and all that false confidence would fall flat. Their bickering only grew sharper until finally Jessica spun toward me, her arms crossed. "You've been sitting there like a statue all afternoon, Calvin. Don't you care what happens to any of this? Or are you just waiting for us to do the hard work so you can keep whatever you want?" Paul laughed under his breath. "He's just glad we're handling it. Probably too scared to admit he can't let go of her old junk." I raised my eyes to them slowly, letting the silence stretch before I answered. "You call it junk," I said softly, "but every piece in this house meant something to your mother. You don't have to understand that, you just have to respect it." Paul rolled his eyes. Respect? She's gone. Respect doesn't pay bills. We're doing what's practical. Jessica jumped in quickly, nodding. Exactly. Living in the past only keeps people weak. We're moving forward, and so should you. Their words stung, but I didn't let it show. I leaned back in the chair, my hands folded tightly in my lap. If that's what you believe, I murmured, then finish your cleaning. I won't stop you. They both looked at each other, confused for a moment, maybe expecting me to argue more. But I didn't. My calm unsettled them, though they wouldn't admit it. Paul shrugged and muttered, "Fine. Don't say we didn't warn you when you're drowning in memories and dust." Jessica bent down and nudged the jewelry box with her foot, pushing it further into the pile. "We'll get rid of this tomorrow. Then you'll finally have a fresh start." I turned my face toward the window so they couldn't see the faint smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. They thought they were erasing her, but they were only walking closer to a truth that would tear their arrogance apart. The box had waited patiently all these years, and so could I. The next morning came gray and cold, the kind of day that made the air feel heavy. Paul and Jessica arrived early, their voices loud before they even stepped through the door. Paul carried an empty cart from his truck and started stacking the black bags onto it, whistling as if he were proud of the work. Jessica followed behind, checking through the boxes one more time, making sure nothing she wanted had been overlooked. She stopped at the jewelry box, resting crooked on top of a bag. She lifted it, turned it over in her hands, then scoffed. "Still empty," she said, tossing it back down. The lid rattled with the force, but she didn't notice. "Trash men will take care of it anyway." I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of cold coffee, my eyes never leaving the box. Every scrape of the bags across the floor made my chest tighten. But I didn't move. They thought they were in control, and I wanted them to keep believing that. Paul came into the kitchen, wiping sweat from his forehead. "We'll have all this gone in an hour. You'll thank us when you see how much cleaner the place looks." I gave him a small nod but said nothing. Inside, my thoughts circled around Margaret's words. The last time she mentioned her jewelry box. If they ever try to throw it away, let them. The truth will speak for itself. Jessica dragged another bag out the door and called back. "By the time we're done, you won't even recognize the place." I murmured under my breath, too low for them to hear. That's exactly the problem. The jewelry box slid further toward the edge of the cart as Paul loaded another bag. For a brief second, I thought it would fall and burst open right there on the floor, but the latch held tight. I folded my hands together, steadying myself. The longer it stayed closed, the sharper the moment would cut when they finally realized what they had done. Paul wheeled the loaded cart toward the curb, the trash bags stacked so high they nearly toppled over. Wedged between them sat the small jewelry box, barely visible under the weight of all the black plastic. My chest tightened as I watched it bump against the side of the cart, the latch shaking with every jolt. Jessica walked beside him, smiling with satisfaction. "Finally," she said. "This place is going to look like a normal house. No more clutter, no more dust, just space." Her words echoed in my ears, but I stayed seated, waiting. The cold morning air drifted through the open door, and I could hear the trash truck rumbling down the street. My pulse quickened. They were seconds away from throwing away the one thing that mattered most, the one secret Margaret had guarded for years. Paul stopped at the curb, pulling the cart to a halt. He bent down, grabbed the jewelry box and dangled it by the latch. "Look at this worthless thing," he said to Jessica. "Honestly, who keeps junk like this? If you ask me, it should have been burned." Jessica laughed, crossing her arms. "Toss it. We don't need souvenirs from the past." I stood up slowly from my chair. My steps were quiet, steady, but inside my heart pounded like a drum. I walked toward the doorway just as Paul raised his arm to fling the box into the trash pile. My voice came low but firm. "Wait." They both turned, surprised by the sudden authority in my tone. For the first time since Margaret's funeral, they seemed unsure of themselves. Paul narrowed his eyes. What for? It's just a useless old box. I met his stare without flinching. That's not yours to throw away. He smirked, ready with another cruel remark, but something in my expression made him pause. His hand lowered slightly, the box still swinging in his grip. Jessica frowned. What's the big deal? It's empty. I stepped closer, my eyes fixed on the box. Empty things don't rattle the way that one just did. Their smugness faltered, replaced with a flicker of doubt. The trash truck drew closer, brakes squealing, and the air felt thick with tension. They didn't realize it yet, but their arrogance had just cracked wide open. Paul hesitated, gripping the box tighter, his pride refusing to let go. You're bluffing, he said, though his voice carried less certainty than before. Jessica leaned closer, curiosity flickering in her eyes. What do you mean it rattles? It's empty. We shook it yesterday. I stretched out my hand slowly. Give it here. My voice was calm, but there was weight behind it. The kind of weight that makes people obey without thinking. For a moment, Paul didn't move. Then, with a sharp sigh, he shoved the box into my palm. Fine. If it's so important, you deal with it. Don't come crying when it turns out to be nothing. The wood felt familiar against my fingers, worn smooth from Margaret's touch. I unlatched the crooked brass clasp. The lid creaked as I lifted it, but instead of opening it wide, I tilted it just enough to peek inside. The faintest sound slipped out, paper against paper, a soft whisper that told me exactly what I already knew. Jessica craned her neck, trying to see. Well, what's in it? I closed the lid quickly and held the box close to my chest. Something your mother trusted me with, something she never trusted either of you to handle. Paul barked a laugh, though it sounded nervous. You're just trying to make us feel guilty. If there was anything valuable in there, she would have told us, not you. I looked at him evenly. She didn't tell you because she knew how you'd treat it, like trash. That silenced them both. Jessica's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes darting to the trash truck now idling at the curb. Paul crossed his arms, but I could see the way his jaw tightened. Their confidence was cracking. I stepped back into the house with the box in my hands. If you want to see what's inside, I said quietly, you'll have to wait until I'm ready to show you. And when that happens, you'll wish you'd thought twice before calling her things junk. The door closed behind me with a heavy thud, leaving them standing outside staring at each other in uneasy silence. Back inside the house, I set the jewelry box carefully on the dining table, running my thumb along the faded wood. Margaret's presence felt stronger in that moment than it had in weeks, as if she were standing behind me, urging me not to let them trample over her memory. Outside, Paul and Jessica lingered by the curb, whispering to each other. I could hear their muffled voices through the thin windows, and though I couldn't make out every word, I didn't need to. I knew exactly what they were saying, plotting, second-guessing, wondering if they had just made a terrible mistake. It wasn't long before they stopped back inside, their footsteps loud with irritation. Paul shoved the door wider than necessary and barked, "All right, Calvin, enough of this game. What's really in that box?" Jessica stood behind him, her arms crossed tightly, but her eyes never left the table where the box sat. "Can't keep it from us." I leaned back in my chair, meeting their stares with a calmness that unsettled them. "Your mother didn't put her trust in you," I said, my voice steady. "She put it in me. There's a reason for that." Paul laughed, but it was forced, the sound brittle. "Trust? Don't make me laugh. She barely told you anything. If there's money or valuables in there, it should go to us. We're her children." Jessica chimed in quickly. "Exactly, blood comes first. Whatever's inside, it belongs to us, not you." Their words stung, but not in the way they expected. They had no idea how much those lines revealed about them. It wasn't about Margaret anymore, not about the woman who had raised them, cared for them, and sacrificed for them. To them, it was all about possession, about what they thought they were owed. I let a silence hang in the room, letting their own greed echo back at them. Finally, I spoke. She left me more than just memories. She left me her trust, and I won't let you strip that away because you see her life as junk. Jessica's face flushed. You're hiding something. If it was really nothing, you would have shown us by now. I leaned forward, resting my hand lightly on the box. Maybe I am hiding something. Or maybe I'm just protecting what she wanted kept safe until the right time. Either way, neither of you are ready for what's in here. Paul's nostrils flared, his fists clenching at his sides. You think we're children who can't handle it. You think she loved you more than us. Don't kid yourself, Calvin. You were her second choice. We were her blood. That box should have been ours. I didn't rise to his anger. Instead, I lowered my voice until it carried the weight of truth. If she wanted you to have it, she would have given it to you herself. But she didn't. She left it in my hands, and that tells me everything I need to know. The room grew tense, the air thick with their frustration. Jessica glanced again at the box, and for the first time, there was something other than arrogance in her eyes. There was fear. Fear that they had been wrong about me. Fear that what they had called worthless might be the very thing they had been chasing all along. Paul finally turned away, muttering under his breath, pacing the room like a caged animal. Jessica sat down stiffly on the edge of the couch, her gaze locked on the box, as if it might spring open on its own. I sat still, my hand resting over the latch, and let them stew in the silence. They didn't know it yet, but the cracks in their confidence were only beginning. The more they pushed, the closer they would bring themselves to the moment that would tear their pride apart. The rest of that day dragged on like a storm that refused to break. Paul couldn't sit still. Every now and then he'd stop near the table, his eyes flicking to the jewelry box before turning away with clenched fists. Jessica was different, quiet, almost too quiet. She stayed on the couch with her arms folded, but her gaze never left the box. It was as if she was waiting for the perfect moment, studying me, calculating. I stayed calm, drinking another cup of coffee, though it had long gone cold. Margaret used to say patience was my strongest weapon, and she was right. They thought silence meant weakness, but in truth, silence was how I learned everything about them. Their impatience, their greed, their carelessness. Every second they squirmed told me more than their words ever could. By late afternoon, Paul finally broke the silence. "This is ridiculous," he snapped, turning to Jessica. "We should just open it and be done with it." Jessica sat up straighter, her eyes darting between him and me. "You can't just snatch it from him. What if there's nothing inside? You'll look like an idiot." Paul glared at her. "And what if there is something? What if it's worth more than everything else combined? You think I'm going to stand around while he plays gatekeeper with our inheritance?" The word inheritance stung. Margaret never raised them to measure love in money. Yet here they were, reducing her life to what they thought they were owed. I kept my hands folded calmly over the box, my thumb brushing against the worn brass clasp. "You think you're owed something," I said evenly. "But what you're really owed is the truth. And when the truth comes, it won't be the comfort you think it will be." Paul stopped pacing and turned on me, his eyes sharp. "Stop talking in riddles, Calvin. Either show us what's in that box or admit you're lying." Jessica added quickly, her voice low but pointed, "If you don't open it, we will." The air tightened. They had shown their hands now. Threats. Desperation. Paul moved closer to the table, standing just across from me. For a moment, I thought he might actually reach for it. I didn't move, didn't flinch. My calmness only seemed to infuriate him more. He leaned down, planting his palms on the table, his face just inches from mine. "You think you're clever, keeping us waiting. But I promise you, whatever's in that box, it's ours." Jessica stood now, joining him, her eyes glinting with something darker. "If you won't give it, then maybe you shouldn't be holding it at all." I felt the weight of Margaret's presence again, her words echoing in my memory. When they show their true selves, let them. Don't stop them. The box will reveal everything. So I leaned back in my chair and spoke with a calmness that made them both falter. "If you really believe it's yours, then take it, but be ready to face what comes out of it." For the other to move first. Paul's fists twitched. Jessica's jaw tightened, but still they hesitated. My stillness unnerved them. They wanted the box, but they feared it too. And in that tension, I knew I had them exactly where Margaret had always wanted them to be. On the edge of a truth they weren't ready to face. The clock on the wall ticked louder in the silence, each second dragging them closer to the moment of reckoning. Their schemes had only just begun, but soon their hunger would push them past hesitation, and that's when the box would do its work. That night the house was unusually still, though not in a peaceful way. The quiet had a sharp edge to it, the kind that makes every floorboard creak louder and every clock tick feel heavy. I could sense Paul and Jessica's restlessness even without seeing them. They moved differently after the standoff with the jewelry box, slower, quieter, like cats preparing to pounce. Their usual bickering had stopped, replaced with muttered whispers exchanged behind closed doors. I sat in my armchair in the living room with the box resting on the table beside me. I kept the lamp dim, the shadows stretching long across the walls, and pretended to be more tired than I was. The truth was, I wasn't tired at all. My mind was alert, sharper than it had been in weeks. I could almost hear Margaret's voice whispering in the back of my mind. "Watch them, Calvin. When they think you're weak, that's when they'll show themselves." From the kitchen came the faintest sound of hushed voices. Paul's low growl carried through the thin walls. "We're wasting time, Jess. He's not going to hand it over. He'll cling to it until the day he dies." Jessica's reply was softer but sharp. "Then we don't wait for him to hand it over. We take it, tonight." My pulse quickened, though outwardly I didn't move. I leaned my head back against the chair, closing my eyes as though drifting to sleep, letting my breaths grow heavier and slower. The boards creaked softly as they moved about, their footsteps hesitant at first, then bolder when they thought I wasn't listening. I heard Jessica say, "He keeps it right next to him. We'll never get it without waking him up." Paul's voice came back, irritated. "So what? He's not going to fight us. He'll bark a little, but he won't stop us. You saw him. He just sits there acting calm. He's scared, that's all." I nearly smiled at that. They mistook calmness for fear, when really it was the exact opposite. Margaret used to say that anger burns fast, but patience wins wars. Tonight, patience was my only weapon. Minutes later, their footsteps drew closer. The boards groaned faintly as they entered the living room. I could feel their presence before I heard them. Paul's heavy steps to my right. Jessica whispered harshly, "Grab it, Jess, quick." Jessica hesitated. "What if he wakes up?" "Then we'll deal with him," Paul snapped. The jewelry box scraped faintly as fingers brushed against the lid. I knew Jessica had touched it. Every nerve in me wanted to spring up to snatch it back, but I stayed perfectly still. Let them touch it. Let them feel like they had won. "Got it," Jessica breathed, lifting the box slowly off the table. Paul whispered, "Good. Let's take it to the kitchen." We'll open it there." The floor creaked as they retreated, their greedy breaths quickening as they thought they had finally beaten me. I kept my eyes shut, listening carefully to each step until their voices faded into the kitchen. Then I rose silently from my chair. My heart thudded steady but strong. This was it. The moment Margaret had told me would come. From the kitchen came the faint sound of the clasp rattling as Jessica tried to open it. Paul's eager voice hissed, "Come on, hurry up." "I'm trying," she snapped softly. "The latch is stuck." I stepped quietly down the hallway until I stood just beyond the kitchen doorway. The dim overhead light flickered, casting their shadows large against the wall. Jessica knelt over the box on the table, tugging at the latch, while Paul leaned close, his eyes gleaming with hunger. Finally, with a sharp click, the latch gave way. Jessica's gasp filled the air as she lifted the lid. Inside, stacks of neatly folded papers and envelopes lay packed tightly, their edges yellowed with age. Paul grabbed the top envelope and ripped it open without hesitation. Out spilled certificates, official and crisp despite their years. His eyes widened, his breath catching. "Stocks," he whispered, his voice trembling with disbelief. "These are worth... Oh my God, Jess, this is worth a fortune." Jessica snatched another envelope, her hands shaking as she pulled out bearer bonds, the kind that held value without needing names. She stared at them as though they were bars of gold. "2 million, she whispered. "Maybe more." Their faces glowed with greed, their bodies trembling with the rush of sudden wealth. They were so lost in their discovery that they didn't notice me step into the doorway. "It's strange, isn't it?" I said softly, my voice calm but cutting through their excitement like a blade. They both froze. Jessica slammed the lid shut, her eyes wide, her face pale. Paul turned slowly, his fists clenching around the envelope he held. "You knew," Paul accused, his voice shaking between rage and panic. "You knew this was in here the whole time." I stepped forward, keeping my gaze locked on him. "Of course I knew. Margaret trusted me with it. She told me never to open it until the right moment. She knew you would treat her belongings like trash, and she wanted you ours. We're her children, it doesn't belong to you." I shook my head. "It doesn't belong to either of you. Not yet. You weren't ready. She hid it for a reason. She knew greed blinds people, and tonight you proved her right." Paul slammed the envelope onto the table, his face twisted with anger. "You can't keep this from us. You don't have the right." I met his fury with calm steel. "I don't have to keep it from you. Your mother already did. She made her choice when she placed it in my hands instead of yours." The kitchen fell silent except for the faint hum of the light above. Paul's breathing was ragged. Jessica's eyes shone with a mixture of shame and longing, and I stood steady, the weight of Margaret's trust anchoring me. At last, I placed my hand gently on the box and closed it again with a firm snap. "You thought you were cleaning out junk?" I said quietly. "But what you nearly threw away was your mother's legacy, and your own dignity along with it." Neither of them spoke. For the first time since Margaret's death, their arrogance had drained away, leaving them small and unsteady, like children who had been caught stealing. And in that silence, I finally understood what Margaret meant. The truth had spoken for itself. The silence in the kitchen stretched long and heavy, broken only by the buzzing of the overhead light and the shallow breathing of the two who had just glimpsed what they almost lost forever. Paul's knuckles were white as he gripped the edge of the table, his eyes darting between the jewelry box and me, as if trying to measure whether he could overpower me and snatch it. Jessica sat frozen, her hands trembling around the bearer bonds she still hadn't put back, her lips parting as though she wanted to speak but couldn't form the words. Then it began. "This is your fault," Paul spat suddenly, whirling on his sister, his voice cracked, sharp and venomous. "If you hadn't hesitated, if you had opened it faster, we could have taken it before he walked in." Jessica snapped her head toward him, her face flushed with a mixture of guilt and rage. My fault. You were the one shouting in the living room, pacing around like a fool. You gave us away long before we even touched it. He knew what we were planning." They both forgot I was standing there. Their anger turned inward, their words slicing each other like knives. Paul jabbed a finger at her. "You've always been weak, Jess. Always. Mom never trusted you with anything important. You couldn't even handle opening a box without fumbling like a child." Jessica's voice rose, trembling with fury. "Don't you dare talk to me about trust. You were the one she never counted on. She told me herself once that you'd never have the discipline to hold on to anything, and she was right. You can't even control your temper long enough to think straight." Paul slammed his palm down on the table so hard. The envelopes rustled. "Shut your mouth, or what?" Jessica shot back, her eyes burning. "You'll hit me? Go on then, prove Mom was right about you. Prove you're nothing but a selfish brute who thinks everything belongs to him." I stood still, my hand resting on the box, letting their fury spill out unchecked. Margaret had predicted this too. She had told me once, during one of our late-night talks when her illness began to wear her down, "When the time comes, they'll reveal themselves to each other. Don't stop it, Calvin. Let them see what greed does to people who claim to love one another." Paul's chest rose and fell sharply, his face red with anger, but Jessica didn't back down. Instead, she stood from the chair, clutching the bearer bonds tightly to her chest. "If Mom wanted you to have this, why didn't she tell you?" she demanded. "Why didn't she say something before she died?" I met her eyes calmly. "She didn't tell you because she already knew. She knew you would treat her things as worthless. She knew Paul would see it only as money, and she knew I would protect it until the right time." Jessica's lips trembled. She wanted to argue, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, Paul barked a bitter laugh. "Protect it? Don't make me laugh. You're protecting yourself. You want all of it, don't you? You sit there acting noble, but you're no better than us. You're just hiding behind her memory so you can keep the money for yourself." I didn't flinch. If I wanted the money for myself, I would have taken it years ago. But I didn't. I kept my promise to her. You're confusing greed with love, Paul. And that's the difference between us. His face twisted with fury, but before he could speak again, Jessica stepped closer to me, her eyes shining desperately. "Let me see the rest," she pleaded. "Please, I just want to know what else is in there. Maybe she left something for us too." I shook my head slowly. "She left you more than money, Jessica. She left you memories, lessons, a home where you were cared for. You threw those away when you decided they were junk." Tears welled in her eyes, though she tried to hide them by turning her face away. Paul saw it and sneered. "Don't fall for his act. He's manipulating you. That's what he's always done. Pretend to be calm while he takes everything for himself." "No," I said firmly. "I don't have to manipulate anyone. Your mother's choices speak louder than anything I could say." Jessica dropped the bonds back on the table with shaking hands. The sound of the paper hitting the wood seemed to echo louder than it should have. Paul stared at the stack as though it were burning a hole in the surface, his jaw tightening, his thoughts written plainly across his face. He wanted to snatch it all and run, consequences be damned. $2 million, he muttered, almost to himself. "Do you know what that kind of money could do? It could change everything. And you expect us to sit here and watch you hold it hostage?" "It's not hostage," I replied quietly. "It's safe. There's a difference." He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "Safe? For who? For you? For him?" He jabbed his thumb toward himself. "This isn't over. I'll find a way to get what's mine." Jessica's voice cracked. "You mean ours?" Paul's eyes narrowed at her. "Don't kid yourself, Jess. Do you really think I'm splitting this with you? The second it's in my hands, it's mine. All of it." The words hit her harder than any slap could have. Her face went pale, her shoulders sagged, and the last thread of loyalty between them snapped. "You selfish bastard," she whispered. "You'd take everything for yourself and leave me with nothing." Paul shrugged coldly. "Survival of the fittest, and clearly that's not you." The betrayal hung thick in the air. Jessica's hands trembled as she pointed at him. "This is exactly why Mom didn't trust you. She knew you'd tear everything apart the second money got involved, and now you've proved it." Paul turned away, pacing, his fists clenched. Jessica slumped into the chair, her eyes wet with angry tears. For the first time, they weren't united against me. They were fractured, their greed turning them against each other. I let the silence return, heavy and suffocating, before I finally spoke. This is what your mother feared most, that her children would turn on each other instead of honoring her memory. She wanted you to understand that money doesn't replace love, that greed destroys what family should mean. And tonight, you've both shown her fears were right. Neither of them spoke. Paul stared at the wall, his chest heaving. Jessica wiped her tears with the back of her hand, but her eyes wouldn't meet mine. I closed the jewelry box slowly, the snap of the latch echoing in the kitchen. This box will stay with me, exactly as she wished. And until you learn the lesson she left behind, not a single cent of what's inside will belong to you. The room fell into an uneasy quiet, their anger now mingled with fear, regret, and a dawning realization that what they thought was theirs might never be. And as I stood there with Margaret's box under my hand, I knew one thing with certainty. This was only the beginning of their reckoning. The house did not feel like mine that night. It was filled with tension that clung to the walls and settled in every corner. After their argument, Paul and Jessica drifted apart, each brooding in their own way. Paul sat at the dining table long after I closed the jewelry box, his eyes dark, his jaw locked, tapping one finger against the wood in sharp, irritated beats. Jessica moved to the living room couch, curling into herself, silent and pale, her eyes red from the tears she had tried so hard to hide. I carried the box back to Margaret's old room and placed it gently on her nightstand, where it had always belonged. The sight of it there, scratched and small, gave me a strange comfort. I whispered softly into the quiet, "It's safe, Margaret. They can't destroy it." My words weren't meant for anyone else, just for her memory. But as I closed the bedroom door behind me, I knew the box's presence in this house was far from secure. Later, while I pretended to sleep in my armchair, I heard Paul's voice from the kitchen. He had his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in a low, controlled tone that he probably thought I wouldn't catch. "Yeah," he muttered, pacing slowly. "I need to know if a will can be contested. No, I don't care what it takes. There's a box, valuable papers, bonds, stocks. He's keeping it from us. Can we force it into probate? All right, set an appointment. Tomorrow, if possible." His footsteps creaked as he walked back and forth, his voice dipping lower, but I had heard enough. So, Paul was already scheming, ready to drag Margaret's name through the courts just to satisfy his greed. It didn't surprise me, but it broke something small inside me. After all she had done for him, the schooling she worked extra hours to pay for, the countless chances she gave him after every failure, this was his way of honoring her, by trying to twist her final wishes for his own gain? I shifted slightly, enough to hear Jessica's voice from the living room. She hadn't been asleep either. "You're really going to do this?" she whispered harshly. "Drag Mom's name into some courtroom? You think that's what she wanted?" Paul hissed back. "Don't start with me, Jess. If we don't act now, he'll keep everything. You heard him. He's not giving us a dime. Why should he? He's not even blood. It should have been ours from the start." Jessica sat up, her voice shaking. "You think Mom didn't know what she was doing? She left it with him. Maybe that should tell you something." Paul laughed coldly. "Don't be naive. He manipulated her, got into her head when she was sick. That's how people like him work, always waiting for the moment to swoop in and take advantage." I bit back the urge to respond. Margaret had been in perfect health when she locked that box and gave me her trust. Paul's lies weren't only disrespectful, they were cowardly. Jessica's voice grew sharper. "No, Paul, you're wrong. She knew us too well. She knew you'd look at it like a payday, and she knew I'd follow you, even when I shouldn't. That's why she didn't leave it to us. She wasn't manipulated, she just didn't trust us. Her admission hung in the air, heavy and painful. Paul went quiet for a moment, then sneered. "You sound pathetic. If you want to give up your share, fine, but don't try to guilt me into walking away. I've lost too much already." "This too." I heard him storm down the hall, his footsteps heavy, his bedroom door slamming shut a second later. Jessica remained in the living room, and for the first time that day, I sensed something different in her. Her bitterness had softened, replaced with doubt, maybe even guilt. The next morning, the tension hadn't eased. Paul left early, barely acknowledging either of us, muttering something about an appointment in town. Jessica lingered at the kitchen table, staring at the steam rising from her untouched cup of tea. Finally, she looked up at me, her voice quieter than I had ever heard it. "Calvin," she said, hesitating, Did she ever talk to you about us? About me?" I studied her face before answering. "She loved you both, but she worried. Worried that greed would blind you, that you'd see her things as junk instead of pieces of her life. That's why she asked me to keep the box safe." Jessica's eyes dropped, her fingers tracing circles on the table. She was right. I called her dresses junk. I didn't even look at the photos before I threw them out. I thought I was being practical, but maybe I was just running from her memory because it hurt too much. Her honesty caught me off guard. For a moment, I saw the little girl Margaret once described, bright, gentle, quick to laugh. Somewhere along the way, life had hardened her, and Paul's influence had twisted her more. But now, guilt cracked that hardness, letting something true slip through. "You can still make it right," I told her softly. "Respect her memory, not by what you take, but by what you keep safe." Jessica's lips trembled and she nodded faintly. "I don't know if Paul will ever change. He's too angry, too sure the world owes him something, but She stopped, her eyes wet. "I don't want to fight you anymore. I just want to believe she loved me, even if she didn't trust me." I leaned forward, placing my hand gently on hers. "She did love you, she never stopped. But love and trust are different. Trust has to be earned, and maybe this is your chance to do that." For a while she said nothing, just sat there holding back tears. Then she whispered, "If Paul tries to drag this into court, I'll stand with you. I won't let him tear her memory apart for money." Her words lifted a weight from me, though I knew Paul wouldn't let go easily. His greed was like a disease, and he would fight tooth and nail to claim what he thought was his. But Jessica's change gave me hope. Maybe not all was lost. Maybe Margaret's lesson was starting to reach at least one of her children. That night, as I locked the jewelry box once more and set it back in Margaret's room, I knew the battle wasn't over. Paul's schemes were only beginning, and the storm ahead would be worse than anything yet. But I also knew this: I wasn't standing alone anymore. And Margaret's voice echoed in my mind, calm and steady. "When the truth reveals itself, not everyone will accept it. But even if one heart changes, then it was worth it." Paul returned later that evening, just as the sun was sinking low and shadows stretched long across the yard. The slam of the front door echoed through the house like a warning, sharp and deliberate. He didn't look tired from his appointment. He looked charged with anger, his eyes blazing, his jaw stiff. He tossed his jacket onto the couch and stood there, his hands balled into fists, staring at me like I was his enemy. "I talked to a lawyer," he announced flatly, his voice tight. "Turns out, you don't have the power to keep that box from us. Not legally. If Mom didn't specifically write it in a will, then what's inside belongs to her children, which means me and Jessica. Not you." I didn't flinch. I simply set down the newspaper I'd been pretending to read and met his glare with calm. "Did your lawyer also tell you that your mother had the right to entrust her property to anyone she chose? Because she chose me, and she made sure her wishes were known." Paul's nostrils flared. "Don't twist this, Calvin. She was sick when she made that decision. She wasn't thinking straight. Any court would see that." Jessica, who had been sitting quietly at the kitchen table, spoke up suddenly. "She wasn't sick, Paul. You know she wasn't. Her voice was firm, steadier than I'd ever heard it. She gave that box to Calvin when she was clear-headed. She knew exactly what she was doing. Paul spun toward her, his face red. "Whose side are you on, Jess? Mine or his?" Jessica stood, her hands trembling but her voice unwavering. "I'm on Mom's side, and Mom trusted Calvin more than us. Maybe because she knew we'd do exactly what you're doing right now, trying to tear everything apart for money." Her words cut through the room like a blade. For the first time, Paul's anger faltered, his mouth opening and closing as he searched for a comeback. But his pride wouldn't let him admit defeat. He turned back to me, sneering. "She's only saying that because she's weak. She'll regret it when you cut her out too." I shook my head slowly. "The only one cutting people out is you, Paul. You've already decided this is yours and yours alone. Not even Jessica's loyalty matters to you. That's why your mother didn't give it to you. She saw the greed in you long before I did." Paul slammed his fist onto the arm of the chair, making the lamp beside me tremble. "Enough with your lectures. You think sitting there calm makes you better than us? You're nothing. You were never her blood. You just lucked into her life. And now you think you can take what belongs to her family. Well, I won't let you." Jessica stepped between us then, her small frame trembling but her courage clear. "Stop it, Paul. Can't you hear yourself? You sound like a stranger, not my brother. Mom wouldn't even recognize you now."
Paul's chest heaved, his anger boiling over, but he didn't lash out at her.
Instead, he paced back and forth like a caged animal, his eyes darting toward the hallway that led to Margaret's room. "Fine," he muttered, his voice low and dangerous. "If you won't hand it over, then I'll take it. I don't care what it takes." He started down the hallway, his steps loud and deliberate. Jessica gasped and grabbed his arm.
"Paul, don't. You're making it worse."
He shook her off violently. "Stay out of my way." I rose from my chair then, moving slowly but firmly.
"If you go in that room, Paul,"
I said, my voice steady,
"you'll regret it."
He stopped mid-step, turning his head toward me, his eyes wild. "Are you threatening me?" I met his gaze without blinking.
"No, I'm warning you. That box isn't just about money, it's about your mother's trust. And if you break that, you'll lose more than what's inside. You'll lose whatever respect she still had for you."
For a moment he stood there, breathing heavily, his fists clenching and unclenching. Then, with a bitter laugh, he turned back toward the living room. "Respect? She's dead, Calvin. Respect doesn't matter anymore. Money does. And when this goes to court, I'll make sure everyone sees what kind of fraud you are."
Jessica's voice cracked. "Why can't you hear yourself? You're proving exactly why she didn't trust you. You think this is about money, but it's not. It never was. That box was never meant to make us rich. It was meant to test us, and you failed." Her words hung in the air, trembling with truth. Paul froze for just a second, his back still to us, before storming out the front door without another word.
The door slammed so hard the walls rattled. Silence followed, thick and uneasy. Jessica sank back into the chair, burying her face in her hands.
"I don't know what's happening to him,"
she whispered.
"It's like he's not even my brother anymore."
I walked over and rested a hand gently on her shoulder. "Greed changes people, Jessica. It blinds them. But you're starting to see clearly. That's the difference." Her shoulders shook as she nodded, tears slipping through her fingers.
For a long time we stayed like that, the weight of the moment pressing on us both. Later that night, I locked the jewelry box again and sat with it in my lap, staring at the worn wood in the dim light. Margaret had been right all along. Paul's arrogance, his hunger for wealth, his belief that the world owed him, it was all crashing down now, showing his true self. And while Jessica was beginning to understand, Paul had chosen a darker path, one that would only lead to more destruction.
I whispered into the quiet.
"I'll keep it safe, Margaret. No matter what he tries, I'll keep your wishes safe."
But even as I said them words, I knew the storm was far from over. Paul wasn't finished. His anger wouldn't let him rest, and the next time he returned, it wouldn't just be with words, it would be with a plan. The final confrontation came 2 nights later. I had barely closed my eyes when the front door burst open with a crash that shook the frame. Paul stormed in, his face twisted with rage and desperation, a man consumed by his own hunger. He didn't come alone. He brought another man, one I didn't recognize at first, until I saw the briefcase in his hand and the cold look in his eyes. A lawyer. Paul's voice thundered through the house. "This ends tonight? He can't keep that box any longer. You heard him, didn't you? He admitted it holds stocks, bonds, millions. It's ours, Jess. He's been stealing from us." Jessica stood from the couch, her face pale. "Stop this, Paul, please. You're tearing everything apart. Don't you see? This isn't about money anymore. It's about proving who we are to her memory. And right now, you're proving everything she feared." But Paul didn't hear her. He marched toward me, pointing at the box still on the table. "Open it, Calvin, right now, in front of all of us. Let's see if you still want to play keeper of secrets when the law's on my side." I rose slowly, placing my hands on the box. My calmness only seemed to inflame him more. "You're blind, Paul," I said softly. "Blind to what your mother wanted. She never left this for you to fight over. She left it so you'd learn what really matters." The lawyer cleared his throat, his voice detached, professional. "If there are assets in that box, we can petition the court to freeze them until ownership is clarified." Paul smirked triumphantly. "Hear that? You're done, old man." I took a deep breath and lifted the lid. For the first time since Margaret entrusted it to me, I revealed everything inside in full light. Stacks of certificates, bonds, deeds, all real, all valuable beyond anything they had imagined. Jessica gasped softly, covering her mouth with her hands. Paul's eyes went wide, greed flooding every corner of him. But there was something else, an envelope, sealed with Margaret's careful handwriting. I pulled it out and held it up. "This was meant to be read if it ever came to this," I said. I opened the letter and began to read her words aloud. "If you're hearing this, it means the worst has happened. My children could not see past their own pride. I did not hide these things to punish you, but to protect you from yourselves. You see money and power, but I see danger. Greed destroys families. I left this with Calvin because he was the only one who loved me without asking for anything in return. He will decide when, and if, you are ready to share in this responsibility." Paul's face fell, the color draining from him. Jessica sobbed quietly, her shoulders shaking. The lawyer shifted, uncomfortably, glancing at Paul, clearly realizing there was nothing legal to contest here. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the box. "This was her voice, not mine," I said firmly, "and her voice is final." Paul tried to argue, his words stumbling over themselves, but even he knew the truth was undeniable. His fight drained out of him, replaced by bitterness. With a growl of frustration, he stormed out the door, slamming it behind him. The lawyer followed silently, leaving only Jessica and me in the quiet. She wiped her tears, her voice trembling. "I believe her now. I believe she trusted you because you never tried to own her life. I wish I had understood sooner." I rested my hand on hers gently. "It's not too late, Jessica. You can still honor her by living differently from here on out." For the first time, she nodded without hesitation. I closed the box, locked it, and placed it back where it belonged. The storm had passed, but the lesson remained clear. Love, trust, and respect were worth more than any fortune. Margaret's true treasure wasn't in the bonds or the certificates. It was in the truth she left behind, a truth strong enough to break arrogance and heal the wounds of those willing to listen. And as I sat there in the stillness of the night, I finally felt peace. Margaret's wishes had been honored. Her voice, her trust, her love, they lived on. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done with Paul and Jessica? Tell me in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story. Thank you for watching.